Hi there, it's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN Radio. We are so glad to have you with us. Every day on this show, we try to present to you topics that you get to talk about, participate in, share your takes, or ask your questions about. Hopefully, each day it's something that is relevant to your life or the life of someone that you know. And Debbie, today we've got a topic that I think touches upon a lot of people's lives. We're going to be talking about people who are perhaps in irregular or invalid marriages, married outside the church, perhaps married in the church, divorced, remarried, don't have an annulment, maybe want to get an annulment. We're going to talk about all of this stuff. And Debbie, it's just it's an important topic, sometimes confusing, but it's a very beautiful area of the church's teachings, as you know.
It really is. I mean, the church has such a wonderful way of healing the soul in our marriages, in our personal lives. And, we're going to be throwing out some big terms there. We've used some kind of just, casual social terms like blessing in the church and stuff like that. But we're going to use words like convalidation and other words that are a little bit harder to understand. But we've got, I believe, Jerry, the perfect guest to help us really unpack this and understand it better and understand the wisdom of the church.
Yeah, so phone lines are open right now. If you have any kind of questions about the state of your marriage as it is in the Catholic Church, is it a sacramental marriage? If you were married outside the church, maybe you were left the practice of your faith and got married, and you've got a family. Maybe you want to return to the Catholic Church. Maybe you attend Mass. You don't know if you can receive communion or not because of your marital situation, or you want to get it, as Debbie said, convalidated, or there's other terms that are used here. Give us a call. This is an important opportunity for you. It's 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. Debbie made reference to the guest that we are having join us today. This is a topic that Debbie and I just felt like we needed to have someone who knows his stuff on this in this area. So Dr. Edward Peters is our guest. I had the great joy of working with him many times when I hosted Catholic Answers Live. He is the Edmund Cardinal Sciacca Chair at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, and also a referendary at the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura in Rome. There's a lot more I could say, but Dr. Peters, just want to get you in here. How you doing? It's great to work with you again.
Jerry, what a pleasure to be back on the air with you. I have such happy memories of almost 20 years ago now that you kind of showed me how to do the whole radio interview format thing, and I was always very comfortable in the hands of a master like you. Now, I've not met Debbie yet, but I'm looking forward to making her acquaintance to the show, but I'm ready to go when you are.
Well, good. You know where I'd like to start, Dr. Peters, is I attempted to kind of lay out the scenarios that people might be, find themselves in that they could call in and talk to you about today. But why don't you kind of lay out some of the situations that you address on a show like this so that people might say, oh, that's me. I want to call in and get some help with this.
Well, as I listened to you and Debbie intro the program, I thought, now, this is a 1-hour show, right? Not a 24-hour show. Because there's just so many different things we can talk about here. But I guess for us, probably the first thing we should start talking about is that marriage among Catholics, and we'll develop all these terms a little later, but marriage among Catholics is a sacrament. That means it's an action instituted by Christ to give us the grace we need to carry on our duties, our responsibilities in life, and to grow closer to Him in holiness. So for the vast majority of Catholic adults, the primary way that we're going to live out our vocation is this thing called marriage. So we really want to understand what the Church teaches about it, what the rules of the Church are for entering marriage, how marriages might end at some point, and what the implications of that are. And basically, the more we understand about the Church's teaching and about Christ's teaching on marriage, the more we're going to be able to live those effectively and fruitfully.
Right. Dr. Peters, let me ask you this question. You're a canon lawyer, and help us all understand. So, as a canon lawyer, your primary responsibility is really to protect the teachings of the church. Is that correct? So, it's not like an interpretation. You're actually safeguarding the teachings of the church.
Yeah, that's a large part of it. A canon lawyer is simply a specialist in the legal system of the Catholic Church. Now, it strikes some people as odd that the Catholic Church even has a legal system. Well, actually it does. In fact, the canon law system that the Church uses is actually the oldest continuously functioning legal system in the Western world. Canon law far predates American law. It far predates even the common law system that grew up from England. It goes all the way back to the ancient church. So a canon lawyer is a specialist in that legal system. What you do is you move the question to say, well, what's canon law there for? Canon law is there in order to, among other things, protect the teachings of the church, to make sure those teachings are honored in practice, and to help people bring their lives in accord with the teachings. But canon law doesn't replace church teaching. It really does, as you say, set up an environment in which it's protected and energized almost.
Right. So the reason why I say that is because when somebody goes and visits or speaks with the tribunal, or even comes in contact with a canon lawyer or somebody who's a canon specialist, I wouldn't want people to feel like there's like a judgment being made on them for their situation. It simply is just exactly what you said, is that the church really wants us to live out our vocation in the fullest, purest, most perfect way. And
yeah,
so
that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
canon lawyers, in virtue of the fact that you're a canon lawyer, does not make you a judge or an evaluator, or a scolder or anything like that. It makes you an expert in the church's legal system, much of which deals with things like sacraments and state and life and so on.
Beautiful.
Take two with Jerry and Debbie. Here's our phone number, 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. So, Dr. Peters, I attempted to lay out some scenarios, but it's people who are married outside the church, divorced and remarried without an annulment. There's the question of kids, are kids legitimate and stuff. So, obviously, canon law is intended to, it's a very, high level specialty, if you will, but it's intended for, the people in the pews. So who are some of the people listening right now and some of the situations, because people might be a little, not sure if their situation, meets what we're kind of talking about today?
Sure. You got lots of different kinds of listeners out there. Let's set aside those listeners who are in a marriage that is recognized by the Catholic Church, which is the majority of adult Catholics today. And let's focus on those whose situation is anomalous or is not completely in sync with that. So it could be something as simple as single people considering getting married and want to know, well, what actually are the rules for getting married in the church? And if I'm a Catholic, can I marry a Protestant? Can I marry a Jew or a Hindu? Are there special rules for that? So there's that group of people that may have questions about what marriage is. And then there's a lot of people out there Catholics, who are simply divorced. Perhaps they initiated the divorce. Perhaps they simply responded to it. They want to know, well, now that I'm divorced, does the church still recognize me as a Catholic? Can I still go to communion? Can I still serve on the parish pastoral council? Things like that. So there's that group of people. And then there's yet another group of people who married at some point, probably in the church, but married at some point, who got divorced and then have entered into a second marriage, one with, let's say, a civil judge or another religious group. They want to know, well, how does the church regard my second marriage or my second union? Am I eligible for communion? And if I'm not, does that mean I'm no longer Catholic? Does that mean I no longer have access to the services of my church? And does the church even care about me anymore? Am I considered to have so turned my back on the church that the church says, fine, goodbye and good riddance? Well, for any one of those groups, I think our show today would have something to say.
So, Dr. Peters, when a person has one of these particular situations that you are referencing, when they go to their parish priest or their parish deacon or someone in leadership, are those the priests or the deacons or the director of adult formation? Are they able to answer those questions, or should they really go back to their diocese tribunal? I mean, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend your first scenario, which is you make your first contact for basic questions about marriage. I mean, assuming you're not going to Google it and try to come up with right answers.
Right.
But if you actually want to sit down and talk to somebody who's heard these questions before, who knows much more about the big picture, yes, you want to go to your local parish. Whether it's to plan for a Catholic wedding or to discuss the implications of a divorce among Catholics, or even to assess the status of a marriage entered into a second marriage, a civil wedding or something like that. All of those kind of questions start off at the parish level. Now, that's not to say that every member of the parish staff is going to know immediately the answer to every question, but they're going to know either the answers to the questions themselves, or they're going to know who to put you directly in touch with. Don't talk to your next door neighbor. Don't talk to Aunt Tilly. At least in terms of looking for canonical advice, right. Because I can't tell you how much time canon lawyers spend correcting what Grandma's second cousins told my neighbor one time about why she got an annulment. We have to undo so much misinformation out there. We have to, backtrack so many distortions about this situation in the secular media that I think we'd all save a lot of time if we just get people used to bringing their questions to the local parish and not worrying about, a judgmental attitude or anything like that, that they have heard these questions before, they understand why the questions are being asked, and they actually are there to help you.
Right. Wow.
Very good. Again, our phone number, we have just one line open. We will get a break here in a minute, and then Don and Mary and Judy and all of you on the line. Very important questions we're dealing with here on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. 1-800-585-9396. Just quickly before the break, Dr. Peters then calls. We often use the term, get the marriage blessed in the church. It's kind of a colloquial term. It's one that people understand more than the actual terms that are used. Can you just real quickly kind of mention what the official terms are for the procedures that you're talking about?
Right. Yes. When people talk about they want to have their marriage blessed in the church, they know that in entering whatever kind of marriage they're in, let's say it's a civil marriage, they know that in entering that, they haven't done something quite complete or correct according to church law and teaching, and their sense of that is correct. So they somehow want to bring their marriage situation, maybe their civil marriage situation, into line with the church's law and the church's teaching on marriage. So the colloquial term for that is, can we get our marriage blessed in the church? But technically, what we're actually looking at is not so much a blessing that the church confers on a purely civil wedding, but rather a conferral of that sacrament by the couple themselves before the official witness at the churches. So there's different types of what are called convalidations. That's the technical term we're aiming for here. There's slightly different variations on that, but they all amount to bringing their matrimonial status, whatever that may be, before the church, asking whether it can be recognized in the church, and if so, asking for permission to go ahead and do that before church authority, which is typically going to be your local parish.
Right. Well, Dr. Peters, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, phone lines are full. So there's a lot to understand here. There's a lot to learn, but this is all great stuff because this allows us to, like you said, become in line with the church, to feel whole again in the church, and that's what we want for everyone. So, dear listeners, we're going to take our break. We did say the phone lines are full, so when a phone line is freed up, please jump in at 1-800-585-9396. We're talking about having your marriage blessed in the church, convalidated in the church. We have our special guest, Dr. Edward Peters, with us, canon lawyer. So stay with us. We're going to take that first break and be right back.
It's new. It's Catholic. It's live from our studios at Christ Cathedral. Call Me Catholic with Peggy Normandin. A full hour of talk, interviews, and commentary on faith. Celebrating, exploring, and restoring our Catholic identity in a modern world. Call Me Catholic every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Hi, I'm Doug Keck, the host of EWTN's Bookmark, and I wanted to tell you about a new book, Praying with Mother Angelica, Meditations on the Rosary, the Way of the Cross, and Other Prayers. It's a wonderful new book available right now. Order it today.
To get your copy of Praying with Mother Angelica, log on to our web store, EWTNRC.com, and type in item 80008, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Thank you so much for listening. It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our topic today, again, we have titled it how to get your marriage, quote, blessed in the church. But again, we're talking about the precise terms that Dr. Edward Peters, our guest, just mentioned. He is the Edmund Cardinal Sciacca Chair at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, also a referendary at the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura in Rome. We're going to go to your calls right now. These calls may or may not take a little bit more time than sometimes we spend on calls, just because of the situation and the details. So we appreciate all of you being patient with us here. We're going to start with Don, who is in Beaverton, Oregon, listening on Mater Dei Radio. Don, you are on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie with Dr. Edward Peters.
Good morning. Thank you. I've got a weird question. I'm sure you've never heard the question like this one before. Been married twice. My first marriage was to a lovely Catholic woman. Got a divorce from her and married my second wife, who was married to my best friend. And he subsequently died, and then she got sick and was dying in MD Anderson Hospital in Houston. And when it became very obvious that she was not going to live, I kept begging her to get baptized. And her response was, "I'm not ready to die yet." So for some reason or other, she associated getting baptized with being buried or with dying. So, but we finally convinced her 2 days before she died to get baptized. So we had the priest come in. He baptized her, anointed her, and put a smile on her face, and she died in my arms a couple of days later. I went to confession, confessed my sins, but I did not ever have that second marriage blessed by the church. And I've been receiving Holy Communion and going to confession ever since. And am I doing the wrong thing?
Okay, let me make a couple of observations. One is there is no such thing as a question that people are going to pose that the church has never heard before. I've heard all sorts of variations on fact patterns like you just suggested, and I'm just one canon lawyer. So really, we do need to stress that people are not going to come up with something the church has never heard of and let them think that that's a reason to discourage themselves from bringing those questions before the church, starting at the parish level and then going wherever the parish suggests after that. A couple things. It sounds to me like you were Catholic this whole time, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we would sit down. I would sit down as a canonist or as a parish staffer. I would sit down and get a very specific series of questions answered for me about when, what happened, and what the prior histories of the people were. But my guess is based just on what you sketched, that the first marriage was probably the one the church recognizes, and the second marriage, the one you described where your wife had not wanting to get baptized, that probably was not recognized as a marriage. Now, it's possible that it might have been eligible for recognition had the original marriage been, examined by a church tribunal, but doesn't sound like any of that happened. So the second marriage presumptively would not be recognized. During that relationship, yes, the church would say you should not be going to communion because you have entered into what appears to be a relationship that is a contradiction to the church's teaching and to Christ's teaching, of course, on the permanence of marriage. But however that second relationship came about, if I understand you correctly, it's over now because your second wife died. Is that right?
She died, and she was baptized and anointed 2 days before she died. Okay.
All right. Well, from that point of view, then, at least as far as the church would be concerned, the contradiction of the witness that kind of relationship gives, the contradiction of the witness against the church's teaching on the permanence of your original marriage, is, by definition, over. Now, you said you've been to confession and so on, which is exactly the right thing to do, because my guess is that is sufficient to reconcile your status in the church, if I'm understanding the facts correctly and assuming a few others, that you going to confession reconciles whatever fault you may have incurred for entering into a second relationship that can't be recognized by the church. There's nothing canonical that I can think of that would need to be done in regard to that second marriage, because even if it was somehow valid, all marriages end by death. So there's nothing there for the church to adjudicate or to assess that way. So my guess is, the bottom line is, given the death of your second spouse and given the fact that you've been to confession, sounds to me like you're eligible to participate in the sacraments again.
Well, when this subject came out this morning, this has been on my mind for a long time, and I have never discussed it with anybody other than a few friends. Okay. And Tilly and that sort of thing. And so I do appreciate it, Doctor.
You're very welcome.
And you have a great day. God bless.
Thank you. You too. Jerry, let's tell everybody, if we could, that when we go through these questions, we try to respond to the facts as we understand them. Right. But for a serious, good, specific answer, you always want to sit down face-to-face with a parish staff member or a canonist and let them ask all the other questions that occur to me while I'm listening, so on. And the bottom line is, always bring these questions to a local parish. That's the first place to go. Naturally, we like to ask friends who we think have been in similar circumstances, and we like to look online for things, and, there's some value to that. But let's really emphasize, if we can, that all of these specific questions and answers eventually should be brought before a live person face-to-face in a parish or tribunal setting.
Yeah, very good point. And we are talking today with Dr. Edward Peters on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. We're just a minute away from our hard break. That's the one we can't move. We get booted off the air by the computer if we don't cooperate. So we will take that break. And then, as I said, it may require a little bit more patience of those of you on hold today. We're going to get to each of you who are on the line right now, so stay with us. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN Radio. We're getting some feedback on our social media as well, some Facebook comments. We thank you for that. Comments on the website, take2show.com. Here's our phone number. If you would like to get in on this conversation, it's 1-800-585-9396, 800-585-9396. We are talking about getting your marriage blessed in the Catholic Church, blessed kind of in quotation marks. There are more precise and exact specific terms for that, but most people kind of understand, kind of taking an irregular or invalid marriage and having it recognized and made proper within the Catholic Church. So Dr. Peters will have more of his expertise for you who are on the line on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
From the archives, this is the wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Piety means that we all have one Father. The eternal Father breathed the soul into my body. Only God creates. And I forget the chances that we had of ever being created. But it goes into the millions. If they were selling tickets for 1 in 10 million, you wouldn't buy one. I wouldn't buy one. I think that'd be stupid. You don't have a chance. But you had not only a chance, but God decided to create you. And He created you with specific degree of holiness that He wants from you. And that's what's so wonderful. We are created by God to be with Him in heaven forever.
For more about Mother Angelica, visit EWTNRC.com.
When you listen to Women of Grace Live, it's not possible to come away from that hour without feeling encouraged, without feeling inspired, without feeling that you've just had the opportunity to enter into holy conversation. This holy conversation comes by way of the many callers who share with us the concerns of their heart, the issues that they're facing. I'm Janet Benkovic, inviting you to join me weekday mornings at 11 Eastern for Women of Grace on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Andrews. 1-800-585-9396.
Actually, it's take two with Jerry and Debbie. So nice to have you with us here. Jumping ahead a little bit there. We're going to get right back to your phone calls in a minute. Debbie and I wanted to take an opportunity here just for a minute, and Dr. Peters, I know you will appreciate this. We're talking about marriages today, and how the church understands holy marriage and helps people kind of straighten out an irregular or invalid marital situation. But really, even more foundational than that is just understanding what a marriage is and should be and helping people enter into them properly. And to that end, our good friends at Catholic Answers have a conference coming up that we wanted to quickly tell you about. And Dr. Peters, I know you are so well connected and great friends with everybody at Catholic Answers. So Christopher Check, who's the president of Catholic Answers, is going to join us here for just a moment. They have a conference. It's their annual conference, and the theme this year is marriage. And so, Christopher, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. We're just going to have you on for a couple minutes, but wanted to have you share some details of your conference. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, and what an honor to be on the same show as Dr. Peters. Dr. Peters, I have to tell you, my brother, Father Paul Check, who's the director of Courage International, I know your listeners know, Jerry, tells me that Dr. Peters is the best canonist going these days. So we're very grateful. I'm very grateful to be on the show with him at the same time.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Listen, Jerry, the staff of Catholic Answers, when we started to plan this conference over a year ago, we looked at the cultural and the spiritual condition of our country, and indeed all of Christendom, and we realized the thing that we understood, the thing that you have to have civilization. In fact, marriage predates the church. You must have marriage, and it is in a state of great disrepair and chaos right now. People don't understand not only how necessary it is to civilization. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand why the church teaches that what God has joined is now a permanent bond. They don't understand the church's teaching on why artificial contraception erodes a marriage. So we've divided up the conference. We've got great speakers, Father Larry Richards, Dr. Ray Garendi, my brother, who actually did his Tessina on Ephesians, is going to come out and speak, and then the whole Catholic Answers team, and we've divided it between the practical counsel, the theological understanding, and then the practical tips of how to defend marriage in the public square. We've got a great lineup. My brother's going to be talking about marriage in the year of mercy. There are a lot of threats to marriage outside of marriage, but within marriage, right? How original sin can erode the marriage, and how important mercy is in that relationship between the spouses. All the details are at CatholicAnswersConference.com this March 3 to 5, and yes, we are still taking registrations. And Jerry, as you can testify, early March in San Diego, that's where all of the people who are living in, Minnesota.
Everywhere else.
Yes, exactly. Right. I have to tell you this. I was just down at the hotel with the staff 2 days ago, and we've used the Sheraton Harbor Island before. They do a superb job. It's right by the airport. Free shuttle, and the blossom trees are just starting to bud out down there. We're going to have an outdoor banquet on Saturday night. Bishop James Wall of Gallup, New Mexico, who's just really a rising bright light in the American episcopacy, is our keynote. And it's going to, and then I'll shut up, Jerry. I'm sorry, I'm running on here. The best thing about these conferences are all the good souls who attend. And you're going to leave this thing, if you come, whoever comes, you're going to leave this thing with your heart so fired from having spent, 3 days in the company of fellow Catholics who love Jesus Christ, who understand the importance of marriage. It's a little glimpse of life on the other side of the veil.
That is beautiful. So, Christopher, I can attest to so many things you said about the wonderful time of year in San Diego. Bishop Jim Wall, he's from Chandler, Arizona, and I have to tell you, he's amazing. You got Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Larry Richards, your brother. I mean, my goodness, what a lineup. So tell the listeners one more time, where can they register right now for this wonderful, is it a 2-day event or 3-day event?
It's 3 days, and it includes, by the way, a live broadcast from the conference of Catholic Answers Live with Bishop Wall. And instead of taking phone calls, all the questions come from the crowd, from the so-called studio audience there. And that's a lot of fun. And I know you know my friend Patrick Coffin. He loves being on the radio, but he really loves being on stage. So it's going to be an exciting time. And so CatholicAnswersConference.com. March 3 to 5 here in beautiful San Diego at the Sheraton Harbor Island. CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Thank you so much for making the time to being with us today, and we hope that everyone rushes to your website and registers so they can be part of that great event on marriage. So don't forget, dear listeners, Catholic Answers has it highlighted just for marriage. Thank you, Christopher.
All right. Well, God bless you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks, Christopher. We appreciate all the others of you, Dr. Peters and our callers, allowing us just to get that in there. And we'll ask Jeff Burson, our social media guy, to put that up on the take2show.com website as well, catholicanswersconference.com. Okay, back to your calls. Chris in Longmont, Colorado. Thank you all for holding patiently. Chris, you're next on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Dr. Peters. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? And thank you, Dr. Peters.
Sure.
My question includes psychology. We know now from psychology how very difficult a marriage is between a Catholic and a non-baptized person. And young people often think that'll work out, but the actual experience of it is unbelievable. So I'm wondering what the background, the history, the philosophy of the church is, and why the bishop does give permission for this kind of marriage.
Right. What a great question, because it lets me use your question as yet another example of how church law in experience has seen these things, not just over the last several decades, but over the last several centuries, has seen all sorts of situations that Catholics want to or end up getting themselves into that they may not appreciate, fully understand when they're going into it. Now everybody who's married will tell you that I didn't understand everything there was to know about marriage when I got married, but, we jumped in and it's worked out. There's a sense in which that's true, but there's a lot of other things about marriage that people underestimate or miss, and you've highlighted, I think, which is actually a very important one, which is the special complications that arise when a Catholic enters into marriage with a non-baptized person. So we're not talking about a Catholic Lutheran marriage or a Catholic Methodist wedding, but a Catholic marrying a non-baptized person. Now, the Church will recognize that marriage as valid because, as Mr. Czech just said a minute ago, and I wanted to cheer when he said it, there's a great Catholic defender of marriage who's pointing out that marriage predates the Church. Christ didn't invent a new thing called marriage. He looked at a natural institution put there from the beginning of time, and he lifted it to the level of a sacrament. But it's only a sacrament when the two parties to the marriage, the husband and the wife, are both baptized. If only one of them's baptized, it may well be a valid marriage under natural law, and therefore it's one the Church can recognize, but it's not one the Church recommends lightly, precisely because A, it's not a sacrament, which means you're entering into a state of life without those extra graces that Christ wanted you to enjoy. You're not married outside the Church or anything like that. You still have the grace of baptism and confirmation and Eucharist and confession, but you're entering into a lifelong relationship without the special graces that Christ wanted us to have in the sacrament that we call matrimony. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that there's all sorts of cultural and familial and experiential assumptions and expectations and so on that we as Catholics grow up with and we take for granted. We don't even notice that December 25th is going to be a special day of the year. We just kind of know that that's going to be Christmas. We don't even know that there's a special thing in the year called Lent that we're in the early stages of right now. It's not until you meet someone who was raised completely outside of that tradition that you understand how much of it you take for granted and how much of it you rely on to orient yourself to the world and to keep your focus on what's important in life. Well, you enter into a marriage with someone who's not baptized. They may be perfectly pleasant, wonderful people. And as I said, the Church can recognize it. But you enter into a marriage with someone who's not baptized, and you enter into a relationship with someone who doesn't have those experiential and cultural expectations of how the year unfolds in grace through Christ, of how we relate to one another as we recognize each other as sinners but saved by Christ, and all sorts of things that are hard to articulate. So, long-winded answer to your question, but why do bishops give permission for these things? Technically, they grant what's called a dispensation for those. They do it because the Church wants to recognize the fundamental right of people to enter into what would be a valid marriage, but they make Catholics who are considering such marriages, they make them go through some extra steps and some extra precautionary exchanges precisely because the Church wants them to understand that they're going to be entering marriage without the full array of spiritual benefits that Christ really wants us to enjoy.
And Chris, you got a full-bodied answer from Dr. Peters, and we hope that suffices for today. I mean, you definitely educated all of us, Dr. Peters, with your answer to Chris's question from Colorado, and we appreciate those questions like that. And Dr. Peters, real quickly, my first marriage, my former husband was Jewish, and it was called isn't it a disparity of cult or something like that?
That's the technical term. It's called disparity of cult, canon 1086, I think.
Right.
And you obviously would have gone through the steps to get permission for that kind of, technically a dispensation, to get permission for that kind of marriage before the Church. And the Church would recognize that it's presumptively valid. That is, it enjoys all the presumptions that what you did was a true marriage. Now, it's possible that marriage, just like any other marriage, could later be challenged. That's basically what an annulment process is all about, looking at whether that presumption really should apply in a specific case. But yeah, the Church does authorize such unions. It just doesn't encourage them.
Exactly. Yeah, I was eligible for an annulment, and so and now I'm married to Catholic, a strong Catholic, and he's wonderful. So I could agree wholeheartedly about when you said about the graces that aren't really, forthcoming in marriages with a baptized and non-baptized. I could definitely attest to that, looking back. But see, you don't know those things when you go into a marriage, and that's why I think this conversations like this are so important, that we understand it ahead of time. So thank you, Dr. Peters, for the question. Thank you, Chris, thank you for your answer, Dr. Peters. Thank you, Chris, for your question. We're going to move right along to Judy, listening on EWTN Radio in Rhode Island. You've been waiting so patiently. Judy, you got our Patience Award today, so thank you so very much. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Dr. Peters.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, you have a couple who were individually married to other people in the church. Those people divorced the original spouses from the marriage blessed by the church. Those two people marry each other. Of course, the church does not recognize that marriage.
Right.
One of the marriage partners, their spouse that was through the church, passes away. The other one, the spouse is still living.
Okay.
However, they've been married many, many years. Now, they no longer enter into intimacy within the marriage. So, my question is, because they don't have that sexual component, they basically live together, they're family to each other, could they both receive communion after going to confession?
Okay, good. Another very good question. What you're describing is a situation that the church refers to unofficially, but pretty effectively, as a brother-sister relationship. That is, that married people have certain rights, and one of the most remarkable rights they have is the right to conjugal relations with their spouse. Okay? Now, if people, for whatever reason, enter into something that maybe the state calls a marriage, but the church recognizes is not a marriage, and the fact pattern you describe is pretty typical of that. If they enter into such a relationship and hold themselves out as married and conduct themselves as if they were married, that's when the church has to step in under Canon 915 and say, sorry, but you are not eligible to receive communion. Now, there's more than just law in play here. It's not just Canon 915. It's the whole theology and doctrine that Canon 915 protects, including the fact that for Catholics, marriage is not just a sacrament between us, but it's also a sign of the union between Christ and His church. So Father Paul Check's dissertation on Ephesians would have directly dealt with that. So when people enter into an invalid marriage, or one that we would say can't be recognized by the church, it's not just that they're breaking, a couple of canon laws. It's also that they're contradicting the sign that Christ wanted to use to show how committed He is to His church, and He used marriage for that. But if the couple involved eventually come to realize that there's something missing, that they've done something inconsistent or actually wrong in regard to church's eyes, if they commit to not using one of the great rights of married people, namely the right to conjugal relations, if they refrain from that, they have taken a large step away from giving objectively bad witness in their marriage. And generally, the church would say that if a couple commits to that, and it's usually best to sit down with a good priest and discuss the situation to make sure you're not treating yourself too harshly or treating yourself too lightly, that the church would generally allow those people who are refraining from that act, that conjugal act, to receive communion. It doesn't mean that their marriage is recognized. I'm sure whoever would sit down with such a couple and say, well, yes, if you're refraining from sexual relations, you would generally be eligible to go to communion. I'm sure that same person would also say, but as long as you're here, let's look at your two marriage histories. Let's see whether the presumption of validity, the assumption that you were in marriages earlier, let's see if that really stands up to closer scrutiny. It's quite possible that it doesn't. If it does, it does. But if it doesn't, you might be free to marry in the church. But a good first step to that would be what you described, a couple deciding between themselves to refrain from conjugal relations, which almost always makes you eligible to start going to communion again. It doesn't make your marriage valid, but it does open up some doors to participation in communion.
Does that help, Judy?
That clarified that answer. I have one other part to that, however. If the spouse whose initial spouse passed away, they're no longer considered married within the church.
That's right.
And this marriage that they're in aside, I'm talking about actually an entire different situation. They want to enter into a relationship with someone who is from a divorced relationship from the Catholic Church. That person whose spouse has died, they are free and clear, they're no longer married.
Mm-hmm.
Is that becomes a sin to enter into a marriage with someone who's divorced?
Well, we would sit down and, I'd have a little, a yellow pad in front of me writing down exactly who was married to who and when and what their baptismal status was and all that. But the general rule is whether you're Catholic or not, if you've gone through something that sure looks like a wedding ceremony, the church almost always presumes you to have gotten married. Now, if one of those two people, or even both of them, later leave that relationship and attempt to enter a second, the church generally says, no, that can't work. Because why? Because the church respects what people did in entering their first marriage. Now, for Catholics, there's a little extra twist here. You do have to get married in front of a church authority figure, like a pastor or a deacon or so on. So there's a little extra twist for Catholics. But what I'm describing here applies to non-Catholic marriages, to Jewish marriages, to Muslim marriages, etc. We generally presume your first attempt at marriage was binding, was good. And therefore, if you divorce and attempt to marry someone else, we say, sorry, at some level, that's a contradiction of church teaching and Christ's teachings on what marriage is. So regardless of whether whether the complications apply to both people or only to one of them because it was a previously deceased spouse or something, as long as either one of them have a complication like that, then yes, it's objectively wrong to attempt to enter into that kind of marriage without the church having examined fully the situation beforehand. Yes.
Judy, I hope that helps. We want to get to, hopefully, God willing, two other callers here, Mary and Lisa. We got about 5 minutes left total, so we want to, I did say that we try to get everyone who called, early on and got on the line here. So Mary in Richmond, Virginia, we will go to you. Lisa, hang on. We'll get to you quickly at the end. Mary in Richmond, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Hello.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you, Dr. Peters, for taking my question. I am Catholic, cradle Catholic. I am in my second marriage. I am in the process of an annulment. Been looking over the papers, and one of the things that said in the papers as far as my story that I have to write as part of my process is that I could have an advocate, and I wondered who that was, if that's the parish priest or a family member. And also one other quick one, as far as my story goes, what should or shouldn't be put in my story?
Okay. To both questions, the advocate is a person who has special training in canon law who can help you organize your thoughts, help you identify witnesses, to explain what the tribunal is doing, why the tribunal is asking this question or that. Most advocates are canon lawyers, but even technically if they're not a canon lawyer, if they're working for a parish, they would have received special training in the canon law of marriage. So if it says you have a right to an advocate, and by the way, you do have that right, then you should feel very comfortable bringing any questions that you have about the process to your advocate, because that's exactly what they're there for, to help you. As to what you should put in, you should put an honest answer to any question the tribunal asks. The proceedings are confidential, and you may not understand why they ask certain questions, but the people who develop those questions understand the law, the canon law of marriage, and how that connects to church teaching on marriage. So if they're asking you a question, they probably need an answer. Even if the answer is yes or no, it doesn't matter what the answer is, they need an answer to it. And don't try to outguess them or outthink them or in any way be dishonest with them, because you want to be recognized immediately as a credible person who wants an honest answer to your question, am I married or not?
Mary, thank you so much for your question. Hope that helps, and we will be praying for the process of your annulment and the process that you're going through, Mary. We're going to move right along to Lisa. We promised to get Lisa in. Lisa, please forgive us. There's only a few minutes left to the close of the show, but you have an important question, so welcome to Take Two.
Thank you, and I'll make it real quick. My father is Catholic. My stepmother is Catholic. My parents did not get annulled when they got divorced, to my knowledge. My dad has been remarried now for 20 plus years. He's undergoing surgery next week, and he's been away from the church since the divorce. I would ask for prayers, and I don't know what those prayers look like, but prayers, please. I'm concerned about his soul.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, my guess is you're concerned about it because you have a sense that your dad was in what the church would have presumed is a valid marriage, a sacramental marriage, and your dad left that and married someone else. Objectively, that's a seriously wrong thing to do. But there is no sin out there that Christ hasn't seen, that Christ didn't already die for, didn't already offer his blood for. So the only question is whether your dad will turn around and accept that forgiveness and bring his life into accord with the teachings of Christ and his church on marriage. The best thing you can do, I don't know the personal relationships or anything, but by far the best thing you can do is pray that your dad accepts the graces of Christ. Now, there may be some practical, canonical steps to take toward that, like having his first marriage investigated. Maybe it wasn't valid, who knows? Or maybe, as an earlier caller suggested, that they're going to live in a brother-sister relationship, okay? There's a number of technical things that may address his situation, but the fundamental thing, since you're concerned about his soul, is welcoming the forgiveness of Christ and resolving to live in accord with that. So probably the most important thing you did in the call was ask people to pray for him, which we all will.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you for the call, and definitely, I would recommend this for anybody, but especially in this case, have him see a priest before he goes into surgery, and maybe just discuss some of these things with a priest, and perhaps that'll give him some peace of mind, and it sounds like for you as well. Dr. Peters, quickly, how do people find out about the work that you're doing?
Tell them to go to canonlaw.info on the internet, canonlaw.info. That's my website with all sorts of canonical resources, questions, answers, and they can track down a lot of stuff there. Canonlaw.info.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Peters, for being with us. Debbie, tomorrow, last show of the week.
Oh, exciting. And thank you, Dr. Peters. We're talking about the head and the heart of the family. So it's going to be a great show. And please tune into it. We want to hear from you. But until then, Jerry and I want to wish you a beautiful and blessed day. See you tomorrow.